我们邀请到国家统计局新闻发言人、国民经济综合统计司司长傅林辉先生，请他为大家介绍2022年1季度国民经济运行情况，并回答大家感兴趣的问题。下面我们首先请傅林辉先生做介绍。
各位媒体朋友们，大家上午好。按照惯例呢，我先通报一下1季度主要国民经济运行情况，然后回答大家关心的问题。1季度国民经济开局总体平稳。1季度面对国际环境更趋复杂严峻和国内疫情频发带来的多重考验，在以习近平同志为核心的党中央坚强领导下，各地区各部门认真贯彻落实党中央、国务院决策部署，科学统筹疫情防控和经济社会发展，坚持稳字当头、稳中求进，国民经济延续恢复发展态势，经济运行总体平稳。初步核算，1季度国内生产总值27万亿元，按不变价格计算，同比增长4.8%。比2021年4季度环比增长1.3%。分产业看，第一产业增加值1.1万亿元，同比增长6%；第二产业增加值10.6万亿元，增长5.8%；第三产业增加值15.3万亿元，增长4%。农业生产形势稳定，畜牧业平稳增长。1季度农业增加值同比增长4.8%。气象条件总体良好，农业生产服务持续加强，春冬备耕平稳有序推进。据全年种植意向调查显示，全国小麦、稻谷意向种植面积、播种面积总体稳定，大豆播种面积、意向播种面积增加较多。1季度猪牛羊禽肉产量2395万吨。同比增长8.8%，其中猪肉、牛肉、羊肉产量分别增长14%、3.6%、1.4%，牛奶产量增长8.3%，禽蛋产量增长2.5%。1季度末，生猪存栏4.2亿头，同比增长1.6%。其中，能繁母猪存栏4185万头。2. 工业生产较快增长，中高端制造业发展较好。1季度全国规模以上工业增加值同比增长6.5%。分三大门类看，采矿业增加值同比增长10.7%，制造业增长6.2%，电力、热力、燃气及水生产和供应业增长6.1%，高技术制造业、装备制造业增加值分别增长14.2%和8.1%。增速分别比规模以上工业快7.7和1.6个百分点。分经济类型看，国有控股企业增加值同比增长5%，股份制企业增长7.8%，外商及港澳台商投资企业增长2.1%，私营企业增长7.6%。分产品看，新能源汽车、太阳能电池、工业机器人产量分别增长140.8%、24.3%、10.2%。3月份，规模以上工业增加值同比增长5%，环比增长0.39%。3月份制造业采购经理指数为49.5%，企业生产经营活动预期指数为55.7%。1至2月份，全国规模以上工业企业实现利润总额1.2万亿元，同比增长5%。3. 服务业持续增长，现代服务业增势较好。1季度服务业继续恢复，其中信息传输、软件和信息技术服务业、金融业增加值
In Q1, the service sector continued to recover, specifically the value added of information transmission software and information technology services and financial intermediation grew by 10.8% and 5.1% year-on-year. The index of services production increased by 2.5% in the first quarter and decreased by 0.9% year-on-year in March. In the first 2 months, the business revenue of services enterprises grew by 13.6% year-on-year. In March, the business activity index for services stood at 46.7%, and the business activity expectation index was 53.6%. Industries involving contacts and gatherings such as railway transportation, airway, lodging and catering were under impact by the pandemic. The business activity index for industries like telecommunication, broadcast television and satellite transmission services, monetary and financial services, and insurance services stayed within the high expansion range of 55% and above. Fourthly, market sales maintained growth and online retail sales were active. In the first quarter, the total retail sales of consumer goods reached 10.86 trillion yuan, up by 3.3% year-on-year. By different areas, the retail sales of consumer goods in urban areas reached 9.4 trillion yuan, up by 3.2%, and that in rural areas, 1.43 trillion yuan, up by 3.5%. By consumption patterns, the retail sales of goods were 9.8 trillion yuan, up by 3.6%, and the income of catering was 1.06 trillion yuan, up by 0.5%. Goods for basic living enjoyed good sales, with retail sales of grain, oil, and food, and daily necessities by large enterprises up by 9.3% and 6.6% respectively. The sales of upgraded consumer goods grew fast. The retail sales of cultural and office appliances and jewelries by large enterprises grew by 10.6% and 7.6% respectively. The online retail sales reached 3.012 trillion yuan, up by 6.6%. Specifically, the online retail sales of physical goods were 2.525 trillion yuan, up by 8.8%, and accounting for 23.2% of the total retail sales of consumer goods. In March, the total retail sales of consumer goods reached 3.42 trillion yuan, down by 3.5% and 1.93% month-on-month. Fifthly, investment in fixed assets increased and investment in high-tech industries and social sectors grew fast. In Q1, the investment in fixed assets, excluding rural households, reached 10.48 trillion yuan, up by 9.3% over that of previous year. Specifically, investment in infrastructure was up by 8.5%, manufacturing up by 15.6%, real estate development up by 0.7%, the floor space of commercial buildings sold reached 310.46 million square meters, down by 13.8%. The total sales of commercial buildings were 2.96 trillion yuan, down by 22.7%. By industry, the investment in the primary sector went up by 6.8%, secondary industry up by 16.1%, and in the tertiary industry up by 6.4%. The private investment reached 5.96 trillion yuan, up by 8.4%. The investment in high-tech industries grew by 27%. Specifically, the investment in high-tech manufacturing and high-tech services grew by 32.7% and 14.5% respectively. In terms of high-tech manufacturing, the investment in manufacturing of electronic and communications equipment and of medical equipment, measuring instrument and meter grew by 37.5% and 35.4% respectively. In terms of high-tech services, the investment in information services and services for transformation of scientific and technological achievements or commercialization went up by 21.3% and 19% respectively. The investment in social sectors went up by 16.2%. Specifically, the investment in health sector and education sector went up by 23.8% and 17.2%. In March, the investment in fixed assets went up by 0.61% month-on-month. Sixthly, imports and exports of goods witnessed rapid growth and trade structure continued to improve. In Q1, the total value of imports and exports of goods was 9.41 trillion yuan, an increase of 10.7% over that of the previous year. The total value of export was 5.22 trillion yuan, up by 13.4%. Of imports was 4.18 trillion yuan, up by 7.5%. The trade balance was 1.03 trillion yuan in surplus. The general trade increased by 13.9%, accounting for 63.2% of the total value of trade, 1.8 percentage points higher than that of the same period of the previous year. The trade by private enterprises accounted for 48% of total value of trade, 1.4 percentage points higher than last year. In March, the total value of trade was 3.206 trillion yuan, up by 5.8% year-on-year. The total value of exports was 1.75 trillion yuan, up by 12.9%. That of imports was 1.45 trillion yuan, down by 1.7%. Seventhly, consumer price experienced mild growth, and the year-on-year growth of producer prices for industrial products slowed. In Q1, the CPI grew by 1.1% over last year. Specifically, CPI in urban areas went up by 1.2%, and in rural areas went up by 0.7%. By commodity categories, prices for food, tobacco, and alcohol went down by 1.3%, clothing up by 0.5%, residence up by 1.4%, articles and services for daily use up by 0.6%, transportation communication up by 5.5%, education, culture, and recreation up by 2.6%, medical services and healthcare up by 0.6%, and other up by 0.7%. In terms of food, tobacco, and alcohol prices, the price for grain went up by 1.7%, fresh fruit up by 6.9%, fresh vegetables up by 3.7%, and pork down by 41.8%. The core CPI, excluding the price of food and energy, grew by 1.2% over the last year. In March, the CPI went up by 1.5% year-on-year and 0.6 percentage points faster than that of February, and maintained the same level month-on-month. In Q1, the producer prices for industrial products went up by 8.7% year-on-year. Specifically, the prices in March went up by 8.3%, 0.5 percentage points slower than the growth in February, or up by 1.1% month-on-month. In Q1, the purchasing prices for industrial producers went up by 11.3%. Specifically, March prices went up by 10.7% year-on-year, 0.5 percentage points slower compared with the growth in February, or up by 1.3% month-on-month. Eighthly, newly increased employment in urban areas expanded, and surveyed unemployment rate increased. In the first quarter, the newly increased employed people in urban areas numbered 2.85 million, and the urban surveyed unemployment rate averaged 5.5%. In March, the urban surveyed unemployment rate was 5.8%, which is 0.3 percentage points higher compared with February. The surveyed unemployment rate of population with local household registration was 5.6%, that of population with non-local registration was 6.3%. Among which the rate of population with non-local agricultural household registration was 5.9%. Specifically, the surveyed unemployment rates of the population aged from 16 to 24 and from 25 to 59 was 16% and 5.2% respectively. The urban surveyed unemployment rate in 31 major cities was 6%. Employees of enterprises worked 47.3 hours per week on average. At the end of the first quarter, the number of migrant workers who left their hometowns and worked in other places totaled 177.8 million. Ninthly, residents' income increased stably, and urban-rural per capita income ratio narrowed. In Q1, the nationwide per capita disposable income of residents was 10,345 yuan, with nominal growth of 6.3% year-on-year, or the real growth of 5.1% after deducting price factors. In terms of permanent residents, the per capita disposable income was in cities was 13,832 yuan, with nominal growth of 5.4% year-on-year and real growth of 4.2%. Per capita disposable income of rural households was 5,778 yuan, with a nominal growth of 7% and real growth of 6.3%. In terms of income source, the nationwide per capita salary income, net operative income, net property income, and net income from transfers saw a growth of 6.6%, 5.4%, 6.1%, and 6.3% in nominal terms, respectively. Per capita disposable income of urban households was 2.39 times that of rural households, 0.04 for less than the ratio of the same period last year. The median of the nationwide per capita disposable income of residents was 8,504 yuan, with nominal growth of 6.1% year-on-year. Generally speaking, the economy in Q1 continued the momentum of recovery, performing within the reasonable range. We must be aware that domestic and international environment becoming more complicated and uncertain. As we face these challenges, we must follow the guidance of Xi Jinping's autumn socialism and trans characteristics for a new era, and fully implement the spirits of the Central Economic Work Conference and the arrangements made by the report of work of the government. We must coordinate the efforts of COVID-19 response and social development, make economic stability our top priority and pursue progress while ensuring stability, and put the task of six assurances and safeguards front and center. We will continue to stabilize prices, improve people's lives, and keep the economy performance within an appropriate range. Now the floor is open for questions. Please identify your affiliation before raising your question.
好，先这边吧，第二排这位男记者。对。
好，谢谢主持人。总台央广记者提问：我们知道刚才发布的一季度的主要指标当中，工业生产是保持了一个较快的增长，那请问原因是什么？后期的走势会怎么样？谢谢。
What do you look at the economic performance in the first quarter, and what is the future trend of China's economy?
今年以来呢，在促进工业
Thank you for your question. Since this year,
那么工业生产呢总体稳定。
industrial production is generally stable as we are taking more policies to stabilize the production. In the first quarter, the added value of major industries increased by 6.5% year-on-year, better than the fourth quarter and maintaining a steady growth.
带动和世界经济复苏拉动的
The reasons can be credited to domestic and global economic recovery and be attributed to innovation-driven development, as well as the upgrade in industrial development. Also, efforts to ensure supply and rapid growth of relevant industries are also playing important roles. First, industrial upgrade. As our development phase continue to be advanced, there is a growing market demand for medium to high-end products. This is coupled with the implementation of the innovation-driven development. Equipment manufacturing is developing sound. In the first quarter, equipment manufacturing increased by 8.1% year-on-year, in particular electric mechanics and computers, telecommunications, and other electronic products all increased by over 10%. In the first quarter, high-tech and manufacturing increased by more than 14.2% faster than other major industries. Second, consumption products manufacturing continues to be expanded. There is a growing demand for consumption goods. This also contributed to the growth in manufacturing growth. In the first quarter, agricultural, sideline products, processing, food processing, alcohol, and fine tea processing industries, as well as pharmaceuticals, increased by 6.4%, 6%, 12.1%, and 11.8% respectively. In total, these four industries contributed to 1 percentage points to the growth of major industries. Third, export growth is expanding more rapidly. We have a fully fledged industrial system with strong supporting capacities. We are adaptive to global changes. In the first quarter, shipment value of industrial export increased by 14.4%, a relatively fast pace. In particular, car manufacturing and designated products manufacturing shipment value increased by over 20%. Fourth, production expanded in coal and electricity industries. We are making more efforts to ensure supply. In the first quarter, the mining industry increased by 10.7% year-on-year. Mining and washing of coal increased by 13.2%. Production and supply industries of electricity and heating and that of gas are also expanding rapidly. In total, these industries contributed to around 1.4 percentage points to the growth of major industries. Relief policies for businesses are also playing a positive role to stabilize industrial production. In the first quarter, we have surveyed around 110,000 businesses of major industries. 66.4% of those companies are satisfied with our relief policies, 2.7 percentage points higher on a quarterly basis, and their satisfaction rate for tax and fee cuts were over 85%. At the same time, due to COVID, in March, industrial growth have slowed for major industries. We need to see that we are still resilient. We are fully prepared to withstand the pressure and ensure the steady growth of industrial production. Going forward, we need to deliver on the supportive policies of major industries and extend support for manufacturing and MSMEs. We'll also support companies that are affected by COVID and ensure supply and a stable price for energy raw materials. Thank you.
先这边吧，就是这一排第几排，往前走，对，第4排这位记者。
您好，中国日报记者提问。
Thank you from
近
China
期
Daily.
受到国外的这个复杂的国际环
Due
境
to complex
以及
international
近期
circumstances
国内多地的散发疫情的影
and
响，
domestic
中国
flare-up
经
of
济也面临
cases,
较大的压力。
China's
想问
economy
一
is
下您对
facing
此怎么
pressure.
看？
What is
此
your
外还想
assessment?
问一下，一季度的经济运行有何特点？
What are the
对此有何
characteristics
评
of the
价？谢
first
谢。
quarter economic operation? Thank
谢
you.
谢您的提问。大家呢对中国经济的
Thank you for your
关注
question.
比较高，特别是对一季度经济的
China's
形势运转
economy,
情况比
especially
较关注。
the Q1
那么应
statistics,
该说呢，
is
今年以
followed
来呢，
very
国际
widely
形势
by the
呢
media.
应该是更趋复杂严
This
峻。
year, we can see
国
that the
内的
international
疫
situation
情
is
呢也
getting more
呈现
complex
变
and
多、
challenging,
面广、频发
and
特点。
at
那么
home,
对经济运行的冲击
COVID-19
影响加大。
is
那么面对复杂的局
reappearing
面
in
呢，
many
那
places,
么各地区各部门呢，
and
深入
cases are
贯彻落
detected more
实党中
frequently.
央国务院的
This
决
has
策
dealt
部
with a
署，
heavy impact on
坚持稳
economic
字当头、稳
performance.
中求进，着
Facing
力
the
稳定
complex
关注大
challenges,
盘，
regions and
有效应
departments
对
have
风险
implemented
挑
decisions
战。
of CPC Central
国
Committee
民
and
经
State
济呢，总
Council.
体看是继续恢复，
Port stability has
开
our
局
top
总体平
priority
稳。
and pursued
那么
progress
主要
for
表现在以
ensuring
下几个方
stability.
面：
We focused on
一
stabilizing
是
the
主要宏观指标
macroeconomic
呢保持
fundamentals
在合
and
理区间。
effectively met risks and
从增长
challenges.
看呢，
That's why the
经
economy
济继续
continued to
保持
recover,
扩张态
and
势。一
Q1
季
was
度国
off
内
to a
生产
good
总值
start.
同比增长
Basically,
4.8%。
first, the major
增速呢
macroeconomic
高于上年四季度
indicators were
0.8
kept in
个
the
百分点，
appropriate range.
环比
In
呢
terms
增
of
长了
growth,
1.3%。
GDP in
从就业看，
Q1 grew by
尽管受疫情冲击
4.8%.
影响，3月份
That's
全国城镇
0.8
调查
percentage
失业
points
率
higher than
有所
Q4
上
last
升，
year and
但是从总的
1.3%
看，
higher than
就业
Q4
总体稳定的格局没有改
quarter
变。
on quarter.
一季度
In terms of
全国
employment,
城镇调查失业率
The overall
平均为
stability in
5.5%，
China's employment has
上
not
年同
changed
期
despite
基
the
本持平。
uptick in surveyed
从物
unemployment
价
rate
看，
in cities in
市
March.
场商品和
In
服务
quarter
供给
in
总体充
Q1,
足，居民消费
urban
价格
surveyed
温和上
unemployment
涨。
rate on average
一季
was
度居民消费价
5.5%,
格
basically the same
同
as
比
last
上
year.
涨
In terms
1.9%。
of prices, CPI in
从国际收支
Q1
看，
rose moderately
货物贸易
by
顺差扩大，
1.1%.
服务贸易逆差缩
In
小，
terms of international
外
balance
汇
of
储
payment,
备稳定在3.2万亿
the surplus in
美
trading
元
goods
左右。
expanded while the
国际
deficit
收
in
支状
trading
况
services
保持稳
narrowed.
定。
Foreign exchange reserve
二是
stabilized
工
at
农业
around
生产总体稳定，
$3.2 trillion.
春耕备耕有序推
And
进，
international
畜
balance
牧业
of
生
payment
产平
is
稳增长，
stable.
农业
Secondly,
形势保持稳
industry and
定。
agriculture
一季
production
度农
was
林牧
generally
渔业增
stable.
加值同比增长
Farming,
6.1%。
spring farming and preparation is
猪
well
牛羊禽
underway.
肉产量
Animal
增
husbandry
长
production
8.8%，
grew
工
steadily,
业生产
and the
较快
agriculture
增长。
situation
一
has
季度规
sustained.
模以上工业增加值
In
同
the
比
first
增
quarter,
长 6.5%， 其中装备制造业
agriculture,
增加值
forestry,
同比
animal
增长
husbandry, and
8.1%。
fisheries increased by
三是创新发
6.1%,
展态
while
势
poultry
持续，
and meat grew
新
by
产业不断成长。
8.8%.
一季
Industrial
度
output grew
高技
fast.
术制造业增加值同比增长14.2%，
Thirdly, innovation-driven growth continued. New industries continue to grow. In Q1, high-tech manufacturing grew by 14.2%, information transmission software and IT services grew by 10.8%, all very fast. New modes of businesses continue to strengthen. In Q1, physical product sales online grew by 8.8%, accounting for 23.2% of total consumer goods retail sales. Fourthly, our economic mix continued to improve. Manufacturing continued to take a bigger part. In Q1, manufacturing grew by 6.1%, accounting for 28.9% of total GDP. That's 1.3 percentage points higher than last year. The driving role of consumption is very significant. In Q1, final consumption and expenditure contributed 69.4% to economic growth, which is 18.7 percentage points higher than last year, and higher than the contribution of capital formation. The ratio of urban and rural income have come down a bit. In Q1, disposable income ratio of rural urban residents was 2.39. That's 0.04, smaller than last year. Fifthly, economic transition continued to proceed steadily. Green and low carbon products grew very fast. In Q1, production of new energy vehicles and solar cells grew by 140.8% and 24.3% respectively, and clean energies continued to rise in its share in energy consumption. In Q1, natural gas, hydropower, nuclear power, and other clean energies take a higher share in energy consumption, that's 0.8 percentage points higher. Unit consumption per unit of GDP continued to decline. In Q1, it dropped by 2.3%. Fifthly, people's life continued to improve. Residents' income continued to grow. In Q1, nationwide, the disposable income grew by 5.1%. Rural residents grew by 6.3%, and for cities, the number grew by 4.2%. The basic needs of people have been met. In Q1, the consumer goods manufacturing grew by 8.1%, and retail sales of food, oil, and grain and beverages grew by 9.3% and 11.8% respectively. Investment in social sectors increased continuously. In Q1, investment in education and health grew by 17.2% and 23.8% respectively. It is worth noting that since March, the world situation has been complex and fluid, and domestically, the COVID-19 continues to have an impact on the economy. Some of the factors have exceeded our expectation, and that's why some major indicators slowed, and there's a pressure on economic performance. But the sound fundamentals for China's economy in the long run remains unchanged, and a momentum of economic recovery and growth remains unchanged. We still enjoy huge potential, strong resilience, and broad space. We have the capacity and conditions to overcome difficulties and challenges and achieve sustained, healthy economic growth. Going forward, we will continue to implement the decisions of the Central Work Economic Conference and the Government Work Report, coordinate COVID-19 response in economic and social development, continue to pursue progress while ensuring stability, and place stabilizing the growth at a more prominent position. We will focus on stabilizing the economic fundamentals, meeting people's basic needs, keep the key economic indicators within appropriate range, and continue to score new achievements in high-quality economic development.
好，先这边吧 ，CNBC 第二排。
好，谢谢主持人，我是 CNBC 的记者。
Thank you.
我有两个问题，第一个问题是关于就业。
I have two questions. First on employment.
今年一季度，我看那个
In
新
Q1,
增的
newly created
新增
jobs
就职位，就是比去年一季度有下降，就是有没有分析为什么这个
Q1 last year
的一些减少？然后
What are the reasons of this fall?
在就业方面有没有关于35以上的就业情况？
employment figure data for people above 35 years old? Do you have more details? Another question regards work and production. Due to COVID-19, some worry that if work and production cannot be resumed till May, their operation will be hit. So what is your view on this impact on the economic performance in the coming period?
Thank you for the question. We know that domestic flare-ups of cases and the international landscape have indeed posed pressure on employment, but employment first policy is brought to bear. Relief policies for businesses are also brought to bear. In the first quarter surveyed, unemployment was averaged 5.5%, 0.1 percentage points higher than last year. 4.9% of them are above 35 years old. There's an increase in the surveyed unemployment. The reason for that in the first 2 months is due to quarterly reasons, seasonal reasons. There are changes of employment in the Spring Festival season will result in a higher unemployment rate. Coming March, we will see a decrease. Normally, we will see a decrease in unemployment, but due to a variety of reasons, people's employment is affected due to a number of reasons. In March, surveyed unemployment rate was 5.8% in March, higher than February. It reflects a growing pressure on employment. Regardless, there are still favorable factors for us to maintain steady employment. We will strike a balance between economic development and pandemic response. We will continue to adopt tax and fee cuts to support businesses and alleviate their pressure. It will be conducive to job creation. Innovation will also be conducive to the increase in job opportunities, which will be good for the supply and demand in the job market. We will continue to advance the employment first policy, stabilize the job market, and ensure that people can find jobs. We will work hard on rural migrant workers and college graduates in particular, on how employment affects economic development and livelihood. Due to COVID, contact businesses were weighed on. In the context of COVID, tourism, catering industry are witnessing a contraction in their business operation. Companies in hard-hit areas have halted or cut back in their production. Difficulty in transportation also affected their production. Despite these pressure, economic recovery is still solidly founded. First, strong resilience. The fundamentals of our economy remains unchanged. We have a fully fledged industrial system and battering infrastructural development. Innovation-driven development is brought to bear to advance the sound growth of the economy. Second, sound response to the pandemic. We have taken targeted and science-based measures to respond to COVID cases. We are seeing new features in the transmission of the virus. As long as we stick to our current measures, we will be able to mitigate the impact of COVID on the economy. Third, we are prioritizing stability and make progress on that basis. We have taken a variety of policies in that regard. We are cutting tax and fee to the tune of 2.5 trillion RMB yuan this year. We are also stepping up financial support for businesses. PBOC have cut RRR to lower financing costs for companies, which will be beneficial and helpful for companies, and in turn be conducive to economic growth. Going forward, we will strike a balance between economic growth and pandemic response. We will deliver on the policies made and ensure that people's basic living needs are met. Thank you.
这边第三排吧，第三排这边有记者。
谢谢主持人。香港紫金杂志记者提问：今年以来，全球大宗商品价格继续保持坚挺。请问统计局对于今年大宗商品价格的趋势有何影响？有何评价？
Relatively high. What is your assessment on how the commodity prices will affect the growth?
This year, the world situation has been very fluid, and commodity prices have registered new highs. Based on World Bank statistics, in March, international energy prices came up by 24.1%. Non-energy commodities price rose by 18.1%. So these indexes were both new highs for this year. These prices are expected to be volatile at high level. Globally, Russia is an important source of energy, food, and Ukraine is a major source of maize and wheat. The conflict has reduced the supply and exacerbated export control, which will impact the global commodity market. The global recovery will show an increase in demand. Under the panic, some countries will increase their hoarding of relevant commodities. At the same time, geopolitical conflicts can lead to sanctions and counter-sanctions, which will impact the efficiency of global supply chain, increase the cost of logistics, and put a heavier pressure on price hike. Amid such growing uncertainties, volatility at a high price level is highly likely. Thank you.
后面吧，彭博，第5排，对。
My question is about industrial output. Crude steel output in the first quarter fell 10.5%. Cement fell 12.1%, and yet FAI, fixed asset investment, rose 9.3%. How do you explain the difference or the massive divergence between the collapse in industrial output for these products that are used for investment, but the continued rise in investment? Thank you.
请翻译一下。
我们看到第一季度的工业品，比如钢铁、水泥等都有大幅的下降，但是工业投资却有上升。请问如何解释这一些数据之间的矛盾之处？谢谢。
好，谢谢您的提问。应该说呢，这个大家呢对数据的关心呢，
for your question.
今年以来呢也是比较关注比较多。
This year,
那么总的来看呢，
we have heard
中国经
some
济呢，
concerns about the
随着近些年的
statistics.
发展呢。
Let me say that the Chinese economy is transitioning from high-speed growth to high-quality development, and there are new changes in economic performance. In terms of industrial output, high-tech manufacturing and equipment manufacturing has been growing very fast, and their support for industry has been very strong. In terms of industrial investment, we can see that in manufacturing, high-tech manufacturing and equipment manufacturing has been growing at a high level. In the past,
工业化、城镇化
industrialization and urbanization has been driving growth in China, but this has changed significantly in recent years. You just mentioned steel, cement has slowed in their growth, but industrial output continued to grow. The reason is that the driving forces for the Chinese economy has changed a lot, and we are moving toward the medium and higher end of the value chain. And our investment in industry, for example, in this year, you can see that in the three major areas, manufacturing grew quite fast. And in terms of traditional products like steel and cement, are not the same as what we saw before. So we need to take a look at the economic performance objectively, and that's how we can lead to a correct conclusion. Thank you.
好，先这边吧，第3排那位男记者。
谢谢主持人。澎湃新闻记者提问：近期，上海等省市的社会经济生活受到疫情冲击。
Work and life in Shanghai and some other cities and provinces have been affected by COVID-19. How do you look at the impact of this wave of COVID-19, and how is it going to impact the growth this year?
Since the beginning of this year, there are uncertainties across the world. COVID continues to spread globally. Geopolitical conflicts intensified. There are rising uncertainties and instabilities. Domestic flare-up of COVID cases, coupled with some factors that are different from what we expected, have added to a downward pressure on the economy. Regardless, under the strong leadership of the CPC Central Committee, different localities and departments are prioritizing stability and pursue progress on that basis and coordinate pandemic response and economic development. Economic indicators are kept within a reasonable range. Despite the pressure, there are still favorable conditions for us to maintain steady growth throughout the year. First, consumption recovery is expected to be sustained. COVID indeed weighed on consumption, but recovery in consumption will not change, and it will continue to play a pivotal role. In the first quarter, growth in consumption contributed to 69.4% to economic development, still the biggest contributor, as COVID impact is gradually kept at bay, employment-first policy is brought to bear. They will also increase the willingness and ability of residential consumption. Efforts to advance consumption of EV and smart home appliances, integration of online and offline consumption, development of new business models and growth models, consumption upgrade in rural areas will also increase or sustain the growth in consumption. Second, investment is expected to be enhanced. In the first quarter, manufacturing increased by 15.6% in terms of investment. Investment in infrastructure increased by 8.5%. As we are upgrading traditional industries and cultivating new industries, we will be able to boost investment in the industrial sector. On the decisions of the country and the 14th Five-Year Plan, we are properly front-loading relevant investment in infrastructure, which will also be conducive. Third, industrial upgrade. We are adopting innovation-driven strategy to shore up our technological development. We are adopting extra tax deduction for R&D expenses, which is producing benefit. In the first quarter, high-tech manufacturing increased by 14.2%, equipment manufacturing by 8.1%. Industries are becoming more tech-intensive. Fourth, green transitioning is also playing an important role. As we are advancing green development, there is a growing demand for energy-efficient products, and as we are transforming the traditional sector to less carbon-intensive, we will be able to boost development of relevant industries. In the first quarter, EV
5G
solar-powered batteries
production
capacity increased by 140.8% and 24.3% respectively. 5G information and AI are also developing rapidly, cultivating new growth points. In the first quarter, smart consumption manufacturing increased by over 10% year-on-year. Fifth, reform and opening up. Despite complex international circumstances, the global recovery is still sustained, which means that there is growing demand for Chinese export products. We are taking measures to stabilize foreign trade, and as we are advancing Belt and Road Cooperation, there are more business forums, which means it is conducive to the growth in trade. In the first quarter, our trade grew by 10.7%, which show the resilience of our trade. Sixth, macroeconomic policies. We are acting on the decisions of the Central Economic Work Conference and the Government Work Report. We are making progress while maintaining stability, rolling out policies to stabilize economic growth and support the real economy. We are ensuring supply to stabilize price. We are front-loading arrangements. In terms of macroeconomic policies, we are actively supporting market entities to ensure food and energy security, to safeguard industrial and supply chains. With these policies, we will be able to maintain steady economic recovery. Overall, we still have large market opportunities and tremendous benefits coming out from reform and opening up. Throughout the year, economic recovery is expected to be sustained. That said, we need to place high importance on the problems we are facing right now and act on the decisions by the CPC Central Committee and the State Council, strike a balance between economic development and pandemic response, and step up macroeconomic policies to stabilize growth. Thank you.
好，先第一排吧，这位女记者。
谢谢主持人。封面新闻记者提问：今年以来，房地产销售下降，
Since this year there is
仍然保持
a drop in real estate sales, but there is growing investment in this sector. What is your assessment, and how do you see it will develop in the future?
Thank you. The real estate market has been followed very closely, and some indicators this year in terms of real estate has been discussed widely. Historically, the two indicators you mentioned has been proceeding in the same direction, but the growth in real estate market is significantly smaller than the sales of commercial buildings. Normally, when a project is started, they will continue to invest to ensure the return of investment. And there is a steady stream of input. Even in sluggish market, the investment could maintain a certain extent of growth. In 2012, 2014, and 2015, we have seen similar situations. In the first quarter this year, real estate development investment grew by 0.7%, while the number of floor space of commercial buildings sold dropped by 13.8%, and total sales revenue dropped by 22.7%. So this going in the opposite direction, it can be explained by a few reasons. First is the effect of the policies, including ensuring delivery. Since last year, the end of last year, all the regions have continued to ensure delivery, ensure people's livelihood, and ensure stability. For those that have been invested for more than 1 year, the growth of investment exceeded 10%. As the project continued to be implemented, the installment investment increased by 0.9%, which has driven the growth of real estate investment by more than 0.5 percentage points. Secondly, the purchase of land has been included in the calculation. The Spending on land acquisition has been supported the numbers in investment in real estate. In Q1, land acquisition grew by 0.6%, which also has driven the growth of real estate development investment by more than 0.1 percentage point. At the same time, we must see that despite the drop in sales, the total revenue of sales is still bigger than the volume of investment, and sales can still support to some extent the investment. At the same time, the rise in prices of materials and installment has also beefed up the nominal growth of real estate investment. Despite the fall in the real estate sales at the moment, as different regions continue to adopt policies such as easing the restriction of purchases, lowering the threshold of public housing providence, and acceleration of approval of loans, the needs will be met, and the sold floor space will narrow in its decline. We will continue to make sure that the houses are to be living in, not to be speculated with, and continue to improve the real estate market and stabilize this property market.
这边吧，第二排这位记者。
谢谢发言人向京一导报记者提问。我们注意到，近日中共中央、国务院关于加快建设全国统一大市场的意见发布。
The State Council has released a policy paper on building a unified domestic market. How can we understand this policy, and what are the measures to do that?
Thank you. There is an opinion on building a unified market, proposing to establish unified standards for the domestic market and break relevant bottlenecks and increase the flow of production factors across the country. It will be conducive to the building of a unified market. We have a big market, but we are now moving toward a stronger market. It will be beneficial for us to build a high-quality socialist economy and the high-quality development that we are advocating for. First, it is a foundation and important requirement for us to foster a new development paradigm. For the sound and healthy growth of the economy, we must adhere to the new development philosophy and foster a new development paradigm with domestic circulation as the mainstay and international and domestic circulation reinforcing each other. We need to establish a normative domestic market which will be beneficial for the flow of production factors. Second, it is beneficial for us to have a transparent, fair market environment. We are making efforts to set up a good market environment for business entities to boost employment and advance development. As the development of unified market advances, there will be a more fair and transparent market environment, which will create more high-quality job opportunities and inject strong impetus for the growth of the domestic economy. Third, it will be conducive to innovation development. We have 1.4 billion people and a super big market. This unified market and adhering to the decisive role of the market will be good for proper allocation of resources and division of labor. It will encourage companies to advance innovation and improve efficiency, quality, and growth drivers. it will be also a strong underpinning for domestic development. Fourth, it will be good for us to lower transaction costs. Going forward, we need to implement the opinions to establish a unified market, align different standards, build a unified market, and ensure that there is ensure fairness and compliance oversight. All these will be beneficial for the sustained growth of the domestic economy. Thank you.
谢谢我是路透社的。我就问一下，咱们现在经济面临这个下行压力比较大。
There is downward pressure on the economy
对这个疫情的管控。
More cities are
价格又往上走
having restrictive measures due to COVID.
另外就是能
will they increase risks
这个
for stagflation?
这个进出口的对经济增长的贡献。
How?
谢谢。
And I would like to know more about the role of trade for economic development. I will take your second question first. On the role of trade. Trade increase contributed to 3.3% to domestic growth. Sorry, that was consumption. And trade in goods contributed to 0.2 percentage points to the domestic growth. And on the role of investment, price, we are seeing a steady recovery in economic growth, which will be sustained on prices. Commodity prices are increasing, adding to the impact on the domestic economy. We have sufficient supply of goods and a solid foundation for us to maintain stable price. CPI witnessed a mild growth. CPI growth by 1.1%, relatively bigger than the last quarter. On a monthly basis, in March, CPI grew by 1.5%, 0.6 higher than last month. Core CPI was 1.1%, relatively the same than last month. Food prices in March dropped by 1.5%. Price in pork dropped by 1.4%. Second, industrial products increased by 3.5%. Services price dropped by 1.1%, increased by 1.1%, 0.1 percentage points less. Due to COVID and weather, vegetable prices increased by 1.2%. In total, the two have contributed to 1.42 percentage points, accounting for around 90%. Fresh food is facing supply pressure, but there are still considerable favorable conditions for the prices. From the supply side, food is harvested, there is sufficient reserves, pork supply is sufficient, and the price is steady. In March, services price increased by 1.1%, down from 0.1 percentage points compared with last month.
也有利于价格稳定。那么总的看呢，价格保持总体稳定，温和上涨，
steady price and mild growth is well-founded. Thank you.
我们时间关系，最后一题吧，第一排。
The last question.
谢谢主持人，谢谢发言人。新京报记者提问。
Thank you.
近年以来，受到国际局势的影响，
Over the years,
全
due
球
to
的能源和粮食供应都出现了
international
天体的局
circumstances,
面。那么当前
there
国
is
内
tightening,
的能源生
there
产
is pressure
能
on
源
the
生产的
supply
状况
of
如何？下一阶段能否满足市场的需要？
supply. Can the supply meet domestic demand? Thank you.
Indeed, there's a big change in international situation this year, which has an impact on agricultural supply and production. But if you look at the domestic market, agricultural output and supply has been stable. First of all, government attaches great importance to agriculture and has adopted a lot of policies to support the development of agriculture, to give better play to science and technology and cultural development, and has produced good results. China's grain output for 7 years has maintained above 1.3 trillion and our output in first quarter has been stable as well. Output grew by 6%. In terms of crop plantation, the value added grew by 4.8%. Affected by the flood in autumn, the plantation of wheat in winter had been postponed, and this year, the weather conditions for winter wheat has been very good and favorable. And in northwestern region, the plantation and demand has basically matched each other. That's why there is steady and sufficient supply. Meat and poultry grew by 8.8% in the first quarter, and in the next step, I think food supply will be stable. Because, firstly, different levels of government has been working rigorously to implement decisions of the State Council to ensure food security, and they will ensure the area of arable land and plantation areas. And secondly, the price for the purchase of rice and wheat has been going up, which will ensure good supply and will mobilize the farmers to increase production. Thirdly, the grain prices have seen a steady growth, and that's why people are more willing to plant the crops. But at the same time, costs has been climbing as well, and we still need to work to tackle the challenge of insects and weather conditions. In the first quarter, major industrial products such as electricity and thermal power has been growing. Coal production, coal producers has been implementing the policy to ensure stable supply, increase the quality of coal. Large-scale coal producers has produced 108 million tons, which is an increase of 10.3%. Large-scale crude oil producers produced 4.4% more year-on-year. Electricity supply grew by 3.1%, and clean energy grew by 8.3%, which drove 2.1% growth in all electricity supply. In the international market, energy prices have been volatile, and we are facing some pressure in energy supply, but we have the capability to ensure stable and reliable supply of energy. In the future, we will continue to implement the policies to ensure stable prices and supply of energy and continue to ensure sound supply of traditional energy like coal, oil, and gas. To ensure the steady development of agriculture and the economy as a whole. Thank you. That's the end of the press conference today. Thank you for coming.